is dissolved, and all the property tax revenue is again distributed normally to the chair.
Through the chair, the TIF district is we're creating the TIF district here for 30 years, so the TIF district will not dissolve for 30 years.
Okay, and through this only happens when the agreement of the TIF beneficiary and TIF escrow account holder. Otherwise, the TIF escrow account continues to build up a balance until the TIF lifespan's end, which is that 30 years. At this point, the money in the escrow account goes into the general fund. Through the chair.
Through the chair to the councilman, so once the TIF district expires and the TIF is no longer in place, then the property tax generated by the parcels that were in the district when it existed would be distributed to the taxing entities pursuant to whatever levy that they're collecting tax revenue on.
All right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The city is the party who pays for the infrastructure improvement. So you can clarify if we are doing this out of the existing general funds or issuing bonds.
Through the chair, we would be paying for public infrastructure out of the new tax revenue generated through the TIF district, or bonds that are issued supported by a pledge of those revenues, not the general fund.
Okay. So contractors don't do 10, 20, and 30-year installment payments. And if so, it'll be decades before the TIF district generates any significant pilot payments, right?
Go back to them.
So through the chair to the councilman, this is an example of how the revenue could play out from 2030 to 2065 that we reviewed a little bit earlier. So in 2030, using the 3.5% annual property value increase scenario, the district would produce just over $30.1 million. And so that's the projected aggregate TIF amount column. So if you look down through 2065, those are the amounts using the 3.5% value increase scenario that the district would produce on an annual basis.
Okay.
And through the chair, if we went back here, I mean, the other way to look at this is what we could potentially borrow through bond issuances against those dollars that are going to come in. And this is that hypothetical borrowing schedule of what we could generate in bond proceeds over that time. So this shows that by 2030, we could potentially borrow, close to $140 million against those future revenues that are coming in here.
Okay. So then my question through the chair was, how much bond debt does the city currently have, and how much are we spending annually on bond payments? Through the chair.
Through the chair, I don't have that with me, so I don't want to speculate. I don't want to cause any consternation with incorrect numbers.
Okay. Also through the chair, has the city gotten any opinion from its bond counsel on the maximum amount of bonds it can issue without affecting our credit rating? Through the chair.
Through the chair, that would not be an opinion that bond counsel would provide. That's an important conversation, but it's not what the lawyers do. That's part of our conversation with our financial advisors, so that we have a really good understanding of how this debt will impact our broader operations, and then also as we develop our financing plans more concretely, conversations with rating agencies and with underwriters to get a good sense. Now, as we've discussed, the general fund will not be a source of money to support these obligations, and so on that level, whatever we borrow with that is paid for with the TIF revenue should not impact at all our general obligation, sort of standing city credit rating.
Okay, just one point of clarity, because bond interests are at the highest they've been in decades. Just so we should definitely look at that, because we don't want to do something that sets our city back, and we say we're trying to move it forward. So this is just something that we're real good. I know this project is to be paid under this TIF is for the Bedrock interview, Bedrock Riverfront work. How much of the city is being asked or expected to spend based on this?
Through the
chair.
Through the chair to the councilman, the anticipated public infrastructure requirement for the riverfront is approximately $400 million over 10 to 15 years.
$400 million. Okay, through the chair, has the city gotten any independent third-party financial projections showing how much this increment tax receipt for this project will generate over the next 10 years? I know you mentioned through the chair that you have some people that's in City Hall that been working here, I think you said 20, 30 years, and they were giving us, but have we thought about an independent person or a contractor or someone who can really look at these numbers? Through the chair.
Through the chair, yeah. So we have been working with Public Financial Management, who's helped really develop the projections, and then our external independent financial advisors are also helping vet those numbers so that we really ensure that we understand them and agree with them as we're building our borrowing calendar and our spending plans to ensure that they're as accurate as possible.
And through the chair, assuming the TIF district passes, before we come back to council to authorize a bond issuance, we will have a whole raft of other external third-party experts which will validate the bond issuance and all of the numbers.
Thank you. And through the chair, I know Chief Epstein said earlier that the TIF projects won't come from the general fund. Can you elaborate on the concept of a third-party debt? Through the chair.
Through the chair, yeah. So when we borrow money, the city does not have to be the entity actually doing the borrowing. We can borrow money through the Port Authority. We can borrow money through the county, and so that is one mechanism that we can use to further insulate kind of more not necessarily as a legal matter, but as a conceptual matter, separate this debt from the city of Cleveland, and also Port Authorities have certain borrowing through a Port Authority brings certain benefits to a transaction under state law, but it would typically be through the Port Authority that we would do this. And if you look at other TIF-supported projects across the city that have included debt, the port is generally the issuer of any of that debt.
All right. Can you, through the chair, can you go back to that lakefront slide? And if possible, can you explain what 5.6 billion economic impact looks like, and can you share the financial analysis of that?
Through the chair, the number here is 7.7, and we can produce the in-plan estimate that came up with that.
Thank you so much. Now I keep hearing that through the chair. We keep saying there is no impact on a general fund and the bonds that we are currently planning. The issue is the general obligation bonds that you have to be paid out of the general fund. Is that true? To the chair?
Through the chair, general obligation bonds do get paid out of our general revenue fund. That said, any debt that we would incur directly or indirectly as part of this work would not be general obligation debt. It would be revenue debt supported specifically by the TIF revenues produced by the district.
So, wow, it's a lot. So what if you don't get the projected TIF revenues? Isn't it true that the city will be on the hook for that? Through the chair?
Through the chair, no.
Okay. And this will be my final question, Chair, as we wrap up. How much money is currently being diverted under the current TIFs from different groups since a TIF extension has been passed on existing TIFs? Where is the money going and for what? Through the chair.
Through the chair, there are a number of existing TIFs that were passed by this body within the TIF district over the past 20 years. And under the terms of those different agreements, those are being used to support the various projects or debt on the various projects. The extensions have not impacted that to date. So for the East 4th District TIF, for example, those revenues are pledged to retire debt that was issued to support the variety of East 4th development projects. Once the extension date kicks in, the first of which I believe is 2034, those revenues will then go into this same kind of TIF district pot, and the numbers that we shared in terms of the impact are inclusive of capturing those extension
All right.
revenues.
Thank you, and I'm wrapping up, Chair, because I know I'm running up on time. One thing that I look at when I did some calculations and talked to some independent people who deals with these type of tips, you know, obviously you get the CMSD, the K-12 schools, obviously the county, the city, and the libraries, and then obviously Tri-C is affected. And when you look at the numbers based on that 3.5 and that 7.5 billion, it stands to show that through the duration of, if we exceed to that 3.5 billion times with that 11.4%, it's like Tri-C is going to lose $399 million. And if it does exceed to $7.5 billion, Tri-C is going to lose around $855 million. So I know we're looking at how this can improve our city. We all want to do that. I think we all in this city, in this building, City Hall, works for our residents. And I think it's hard for me to understand what type of effect this will have on Tri-C when almost 60% of their revenue is from taxpayers. So they're going to take a loss on it. Those other different organizations or entities that I spoke of, from the K to school, the county, a lot of them does work with the administration, so they're not going to come out and voice their opinion regarding this. So my question I definitely will leave is, would the administration be willing to agree on a moratorium on commercial abatements during the life of the TIF district? As it stands, we already lose significant amount of tax receipts from the residential abatements, and it is a big burden that are paying to increase the public service generated by the Bedrock projects and similar development on the backs of seniors and others established homeowners. If you look at what we're doing, and you look at how we building these properties, and you look at the COVID, a lot of people are not in their office, and a lot of things being built downtown is retail, and then you got apartments above. But when you got a 15-year tax abatement, only people that's going to suffer and have to deal with the burden are those homeowners who are much more older and more seasoned, and they're going to have to swallow that burden and have to pay that. So I would definitely look and see how we can do some different things. And as close, can we look at that? And then a two-part code. Since we've been in office, obviously with this administration, I got in at the same time. Can we name 3 projects from the start to finish that this administration has currently done that are outside of the Opportunity Corridor or near Cleveland Clinic neighborhood or downtown as a footprint? Through the chair.
And Chief and Councilman, because we got the MOU signing as well, and you hear the clapping, so I'm gonna take a brief recess for like 30 minutes, and we'll come back, and so that we can go down to the MOU signing, we'll come back and we'll finish this. It's just a busy day, all right? And so, Chief, if you want to briefly respond, Chiefs, if you want to briefly respond, and then we can come back and we can dig into it a little bit deeper.
Through the chair, on the first point, I think, you know, the use of any tool like this requires a conversation about how we use other economic development tools, and I think we would be happy to have additional conversations about commercial abatement, et cetera. With respect to other projects outside of those 3 areas, we have the Southeast Side, the variety of Southeast Side initiatives that have been implemented by the mayor and our team. We have the police headquarters, which is certainly not downtown. I wouldn't say it's downtown.
Centrovia, a variety of housing projects, you know, on the near west side. There's a new housing project in Midtown that's getting ready to complete in your ward, Councilman. I mean, there's a variety of development projects. And I would just note on the taxing entity point, that 300 million wouldn't be there to be lost, but for the TIF district. So it's kind of zero or zero, right? The investments here that we're making in the district are what is creating that additional value. Without it, that value doesn't get created, so it can't, there's nothing there to lose.
All right, we're going to pause on that point. We're going to recess for 30 minutes, go down to the MOU sign. I would encourage everyone here to come down and witness this today. The great work led by Council President on the CBO ordinance, the CBO, and we'll come back, we'll resume with our discussion with the TIF district, okay? Madam Clerk, we're going to recess for about 30 minutes. session. Both chiefs are here, members of the committee. Other folks will join in as we go along. All right? All right. We'll hold off on if there's any additional response to Councilman Starr until he is back from the MOU signing. We can move on for now. All right? We're going to move to Councilwoman Spencer.
All right, I'm glad I came back on the early round from the
Glad you
MOU
did, too.
signing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Great discussion today, and, you know, I also have, prior to today, there's been a lot of conversation, so this is not the first time we've heard this. And I want to start by recognizing I appreciate the Bibb administration's perspective that we cannot continue to just manage decline, and that the status quo is not going to work for us. So I understand those things very well, and that does speak to me. But I think that council, you know, the reason today is important is we really do need to do this thorough vetting and make sure that we individually and collectively understand what's being committed to. And I know that this is the first of multiple pieces of legislation. But the reason today is a big day is because I mean, we're really defining the map and the boundaries is one of the big things that would be decided if this passes out of committee today and then goes to full council this next week. I wanted to therefore just take a moment. Could we go to the slide with the map and the district boundaries? And just to clarify any remaining discrepancies in my own mind, is the Bedrock Lake Riverfront project included in this TIF district or not included? Where is it depicted on the map through the chair?
Through the chair, so it's in there, in that boundary kind of.
You may want to go up to the
Yeah,
screen.
it's.
Maybe, Chief, you narrate while he's speaking.
Yeah, it's in the area. I mean, there's an existing TIF on part of Tower City, but it's in there as the chief is outlining by the river, by the riverfront.
So to be clear, there is not yet a 41 TIF for Bedrock, correct? Through the chair?
Correct. We would anticipate coming with that in the coming months.
So so to further clarify, it is not within the TIF district, or how would that interact with the TIF district?
Through the chair, it is within the TIF district, and if we later enacted a 41 TIF, it would come out of the TIF district, just like if we enacted a 41 TIF for any other project or property within the TIF district.
Okay, so I think that the map is a little, just to clarify, it says parcels currently exempt. So some of them are and some of them aren't. So I did not realize that later you could lift something out of the TIF district for an individual 41 TIF. I think that's worth putting a pin in, and I might come back to that at Finance Committee Monday when we come back with further questions.
Yeah,
about
through the
that.
chair, I know I hit that point during the presentation that just because something's in the TIF district, we can later choose to enact a 41 project TIF and take it out. So that, you know, I think for other property owners who may be contemplating projects downtown, this still remains a tool. And obviously it's a conversation we're going to have. We're going to have to look at the impact of taking something out in the future to create a project TIF on the TIF district finances.
So just on the last point on this line of questioning is, do the revenue projections presume that being not included, the Bedrock holdings not being included, because they will be pulled out as a 41 TIF? Do the revenue projections anticipate that through the chair?
Through the chair, yes, I believe that they do. There's also an aspect that isn't, it's a bit too nuanced for a presentation at this level, but there is going to be an interplay between the TIF district that we're discussing today and the Bedrock 41 TIF in terms of what sources are being used to pay for public infrastructure within the Bedrock project. Some of the proceeds of the TIF the 41 project TIF for the bedrock parcels will be used to pay for public infrastructure as well.
Okay. I will move on for now. Thank you. There's one slide that talks about the impact on other taxing entities. If we could go to that one. Almost there. That one. I would appreciate having a higher comfort level. There's a quote right on the slide where you've Felton Thomas saying, we believe this is a good thing. But I think it would have been more appropriate to bring these taxing entities to the table today. I think these are really big questions, and I would actually, for Tri-C, for the county, for the library, I think it would be, if they do indeed support it, can we hear from them directly about their feedback on this? So have they crunched the numbers? Do they have, could we have more information about not only their support, but what anticipated losses, if any, and how are they looking at this? Because I just think we don't have, it's just a small question in the back of my mind is why are these partners not here to speak to us directly about their support or the impacts on them going forward through the chair?
Through the chair, I think it's a difficult thing for many of these taxing entities, and even any of them that we've spoken to have said, "Am I happy about the TIF district and the potential that we may have to forego revenue?" No, but I think in the majority of the conversations that we've had with the taxing partners, they acknowledge, as the director of the library did here, that if this is good for Cleveland, if it generates growth, if it generates positive outcomes for the community, that's consistent with our mission. Anything you want to add?
I understand. I think though that us being clear-eyed about I think it's up to them if they want to reach out to council, but I think that that's a gap in the conversation at this point is whether they have, I presume they've crunched the numbers, and it would be of interest to see what they anticipate, what projections they anticipate, if things stay as they are, or if this goes into place, what that would look like for them. So I'm just kind of stating that for the record, Mr. Chair, and it might be something that is potentially part of a discussion if this moves to Finance Committee next week.
Sure. Thank you for that, Councilwoman. I hear you loud and clear. And, should we move this out today, we can have a discussion with Council President, and, this will have to go to Finance before a full vote of the body on the floor, so we can, have that discussion with the Council President about those individuals or entities, coming here during Finance Committee.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you are.
Thanks. I know that, moving on, Mr. Chair, I know that Councilman Starr already asked about this, but I just think I really need to make sure it's crystallized in my mind about, I know this particular piece sets up the tool and there'll be much more in-depth discussions down the road about the risk. But again, to restate the kind of very simple question, if the revenue, so through the chair, if the revenues fall short, who holds the risk ultimately? So what will happen if the projections fall short, and in plain English?
Through the chair, I think it depends on the borrowing instrument. If the port, for example, were to issue bonds and people buy those bonds on the market, it is the bondholders who bear the risk.
But then, through the chair, then there would be some impact on the city, and what would that impact be in that instance?
There would be no legal obligation in the city beyond the revenues that were generated by the TIF district.
And it, through the chair, would not impact our bond rating. It would not have any adverse impact on the city of Cleveland whatsoever.
To my knowledge, no, but we can follow up with Chief Abinamo when he returns to the table.
Okay, so that's still, I think that is, I don't know if my other colleagues are interested in exploring that question further, but I think that is kind of a key here as we continue these conversations. And because, there's a lot of factors you can't guess, right? You can project, but you can't guess ultimately what will transpire.
And through the chair, I think it's one of the reasons why the only piece of legislation is before you today is the creation of the district and
Right.
not yet the issuance of any bonds or borrowing.
Right, exactly. So, and I just appreciated you, Mr. Chair, if I understood you correctly in your earlier comments, just a statement almost or some sort of very transparent affirmation that the general fund would be held harmless, I think is critically important. Did I understand that correctly, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. And, I know that, again, we're going to be discussing the borrowing and debt issuance and all in future discussions, but I've said it before through the chair to you, Chief, and I'll say it again. From where I sit, I would likely only be comfortable with the most conservative estimates in terms of leveraging, but we'll get back to that discussion at a later time. So I think I will conclude with that, Mr. Chair, and then I'll ask to come back on if I have more questions.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman Spencer. Great questions, and again, we can have that discussion with the council president for finance, next Monday, okay? Councilman Conwell, do you have a point?
Passing through, and I like the chief, but that was a weak response when she asked you about risk. When you go for those bonds, you're going to monitor the risk, and you're going to put systems in place to monitor risk. You don't just wait till risk happen. And when you do your strategic planning, you're going to look at the risk. I don't want things just, oh well, that's only no. Wait a minute. Whenever you create systems, you monitor risk. And when she asked you about that, and I was sitting there watching you, and that response I just didn't like.
Through the chair, in some ways I'm deferring to the CFO on the specific question about bond rating risk. But as we discussed earlier today, any bonds that are issued will likely be issued by a third party, the port, and secured solely by a pledge of these TIF district revenues with no impact whatsoever on the general fund.
Yeah, but you still got to watch and you still have to monitor
Well,
because it's part of the whole. Don't get upset about it.
I'm not upset.
It is, man. It's part of the whole. I will watch everything through the chair, to the chief.
Through the chair, we're not borrowing any money.
We're
today.
not.
We're seeking to borrow any money.
Right.
And we talked earlier about our bond counsel, our financial advisors, and everyone looking through the numbers that we have, which are basic projections today, and that will continue to be engaged before we seek to borrow any funds through the TIF district. But we also were very clear earlier that this will absolutely not pledge any the full faith and credit of the city, pledge any general fund dollars, or risk any general fund dollars.
And I get that. But things change, and you're championing this TIF, and you guys, when you champion something, you're supposed to always monitor and control till you just don't throw things up in the air. And you're going to have stakeholders and partners through the chair. So we got to look and watch everything because you champion it.
Thanks, Councilman.
Yeah.
We got your point.
And Mr. Chairman.
Hold on. This committee has order, so please. You asked for a point. We want to give it to you to make sure we get your point across and the chief responds, all right? So we want to make sure. Yeah.
I'll talk with him later. I'll go to his office and we'll
Sure.
talk about it, and I'll look over it, but I just don't agree with it.
We hear you loud and clear. And earlier, there was a deep dive into, what that looks like and how, they envision, this to go, what our expectations are in terms of explicitly stating that our general fund will be held accountable, monitoring the risk along the way, and having a deep conversation with a third party as relates to our bond rating, our capacity, and so forth. So, we will absolutely dig deeper into the conversation. This here today, again, as stated, allows us to create the tool, but this is the first step. We have many more steps to go along the way before we can actually realize some of the movement on this TIF district.
I got you. And you do a risk analysis also for us in the system.
Correct.
I got to go out. You know what I'm outside doing.
Yep. Thanks, Councilman. Councilwoman Spencer?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I simply wanted to put a pin when the CFO does come back, if we could briefly revisit
You got it.
that question when he
it.
returns. Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Harsh. Councilman Harsh, you ready?
Well, I have questions for Chief Abinama as well. Do we know how long he's going to be?
Where is he?
Through the chair, he should be right back. He just had to step out for a quick meeting.
All right. You want to
Okay.
hold? Or you have other questions that Chief Epstein can answer?
I would rather wait, if that's okay.
All right. Councilman Joe Jones?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to also wait.
Then I'll get started.
Where is he?
I'll get
Through
started.
the
That's
chair,
fine. That's
I'm
fine.
happy.
No, no,
I'm
no.
happy to
We
field
don't need to
questions.
waste
I'm
any more time.
Pretty
Okay.
well versed on this.
Hold on 1 second. So is he, Mr. Visano, how long do we expect Mr. Avenama to be?
I'd say in fewer than 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I'll
please
just-
have him come up. So Councilman Harsh, go ahead and get us
All
started.
right. So, just, Mr. Chair, I've had 2 ward meetings where this subject of the TIF district has come up. I've had extensive conversations with constituents, and I've talked to a number of people that work in municipal finance, and I've said this publicly before. I was asking someone to give me a reason to not support this, and I can't find one. This seems, for all intent and purposes, like a fantastic idea. I would echo Councilman McCormick's earlier statements that it's time for Cleveland to invest in Cleveland, and we can't just sit around and let suburban flight keep draining this city forever and ever and ever, and then hope through some miracle gift from God that we somehow rebound our population. We need to invest in the city in order to grow the city. We have to abandon managed decline and embrace growth mentality, and that's what I see essentially happening here. So I do have questions, and I want to just premise them in that I like this proposal and I'm going to support it, but I'd like to know a few more details. The first is through the chair to the chief. It looks like we project potentially 30 million in bonds in 24 and 52 million in 27, which is 82. But that doesn't get us close to the price of a land bridge. Through the chair to the chief, what kind of start is that for the East Bank River project and the work that needs to go into bulkheads and the work that needs to go into infrastructure for the Bedrock project specifically? How close? I think you had projected 400 million on that. So what is a $30 million down payment on that in terms of spurring the private investment?
Chief?
Through the chair, we're still very much working through the pace of spending needs on each of these particular projects. And yes, you're correct that the initial bonding is not enough to meet the full need, which is one of the reasons why we are looking at other matching sources across the state and federal government to help get these going. We have been working closely on the riverfront piece with Bedrock to understand the pace and level of need and other financing tools that may be used to help advance that. Some of the conversations, and it was included in the master development agreement with Bedrock, would enable them to front some of that public infrastructure money to be paid back over time.
So let me interrupt here because this is really important through the chair. The agreement with Bedrock, some of that is already in ink.
Through the chair to the council, the council approved the master development agreement
Okay.
with Bedrock several months ago.
Mr. Chair, I listened to Chief Epstein on The Sound of Ideas the other day with Coin, the real estate developer, who said he would never advise a client to do what Dan Gilbert's doing. It doesn't pencil. It's not a money-making. This is pure philanthropy. This is investment. We always talk about how billionaires need to do more. This is pure investment in the city that isn't going to yield returns. The return on this investment does not make sense from a financial perspective. And I think that we should be aware of the fact that we're potentially looking at a partner for the city unlike one we've had since Rockefeller. And my concern is, through the chair to the chief, does the rest of Bedrock Development feel the same way about the investment in Cleveland as Mr. Gilbert does? And what reassurances do we have that they will continue down this path of investment in 3, 6, 10 years when we don't know what the political landscape is going to look like in Cleveland, and we don't know what the leadership of Bedrock is going to look like. Like, what assurance do we have that this public investment in infrastructure is going to continue to yield private investment from one developer who seems like he wants to do great things, but seems like he's one person?
Through the councilman, through the chair to the councilman, I'll say a couple of things. One, I don't completely agree with Mr. Coyne's characterization that this project is not going to make any money. I think this is a unique developer that is looking at a longer time frame in terms of financial return, but they are very much looking at and expecting financial return here. They are, I think, just take a broader perspective on the type of impact they can have through development as they have in Detroit. I will also say that in the conversations that our team has continued to have at all levels of the Bedrock organization, they continue to work very hard on this project, be very committed to the project, and we have a signed master development agreement which outlines the respective obligations of the parties and our obligation to continue to fund public infrastructure and Bedrock's obligation to continue investment.
Yeah, and to add to that, through the chair, I think the time horizon is a really important point. Most real estate developers are looking to return their money within 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
And if Mr. Gilbert was to take that horizon, then Mr. Coyne would be correct in his assessment. But
Sure.
looking 15, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, certainly economic returns are
I see.
likely. In addition to the commitment of the both entities, the development agreement sets out the sort of high-level obligations of both sides, but it is clear that our obligations kind of begin and end on a phase level basis. So if for some reason there is in the future a decommitment of Bedrock from this project, then our obligations would also go away. So we're not committed to the whole thing, irrespective of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to walk in tandem along during
That's
the entire
interesting.
project.
Okay. And since, and through the chair, since any investment they do in terms of new buildings would be immediately taxable, they would not be exempt by a vertical TIF or by a .41 TIF. So if they do new construction down there, that all immediately gets captured by the TIF district, the value of that investment.
Through the chair, yes. If there's a 41 TIF, we would have a negotiation with Bedrock and ultimately with council in enacting that TIF as far as where the TIF proceeds from the vertical project TIF would go, as between, because 41 TIFs
Yeah.
can be used to subsidize vertical development.
Speaking of which, let me detour, and I think Councilwoman Spencer was getting around to it, but I apologize, I walked in late. If a vertical TIF expires, does it become part of the horizontal TIF, the district? Say you've got a 30-year TIF that expires in 15 years, and so it expires, and there's still 15 years left on the TIF district. Does it become part of
Through
the
the
district?
chair, I believe that it would not, because those existing parcels that have TIFs on them are exempted, are not part of the TIF district. If we put the TIF district over all those parcels, those previous TIFs
Okay.
would be wiped out.
Okay. I do have a question. So I think we were talking about what happens to the bond debt payment if the proceeds from the TIF district don't match the expected. And I think the answer is simply if we don't pay our bond debt, our bond rating tanks. And it is just municipal malfeasance to do that. We have to pay our bond debts. We have to keep our bond rating up. But we would have to find new revenue to pay bond debt if we were to bond out and then all of a sudden the TIF revenue didn't come in. That's just the risk that we're taking. That is that's the risk of going to the bond market to begin with. And that's why I was wanting to ask you some questions about the bond market itself. Through the chair to the chief, when we go to the bond market with designs on a dollar amount, or if the port does it for us and we've got the revenue, does the bond market tell us what we're eligible for, or do we go in with a proposal and then they evaluate that?
Through the chair, so a little bit of both, I'd say. I mean, ultimately, we will go to the bond market in some fashion, either directly as the city or indirectly through the port or some other entity. We will have all our documents in a row in terms of what we think what we project the revenue will be in the TIF district.
And will they analyze that projection?
Oh, you better believe it.
Sure, good.
So those underwriters who are taking on the risk, ultimately, so when we do an underwritten deal, the bank that is the lead underwriter is buying our bonds. We
Okay.
get the money.
Right,
They buy them.
right.
So they're taking on that risk.
So they do the risk analysis.
And they will tell us, based on the revenue stream, you can borrow X dollars, and at Y interest rate,
And-
you can borrow Y dollars at Z interest rate, et
Fair.
cetera.
Through the chair to the chief, when we go in there with projected revenue, do they then analyze the risk of of our projections?
Yes.
And say, we think your projections are off, we think they're wrong, and that's why you're talking about being conservative. The bank is going to analyze our projections.
Through the chair, the investment banking firm that is the underwriter for whatever bond deals we do will independently vet every piece of data we give them.
Okay.
Because A, they're taking on the risk by
Right.
being an underwriter. So that's a real sort of financial legal risk. Second, if they sell bad bonds to their investors, to their customers,
right.
they're taking on reputational risk too.
Right.
And no one in this chain, from the issuer on down to the investor,
Right.
wants to be associated with a bond that goes belly up.
Right.
And so, we have projections. They're just that. The bond market will tell us in no uncertain terms how much we can borrow.
So in reference to that, through the chair, the 30 million, the 52 million in 24 and 27, are those based on a 3.5% appreciation rate? So they could be higher if we beat it. Okay. That was a big lingering question. But I also have a question about the concept that public investment increases building value. We just talked about 200 Public Square, I guess the BP or the Huntington building, depreciating from 180 to 64 million, I mean, that's a 66% drop. But yet we invested how many millions of dollars in Public Square? I mean, that investment in Public Square was sizable. I don't know what the total price tag is. Maybe somebody here remembers. But why did that investment not lead to increased value of that building?
Through the chair, COVID.
COVID.
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's really as simple as work from home. Nobody could have
massive
anticipated
reset in
this.
the commercial real estate market.
And so even though law firms still have office space, they're
Sure.
all reducing the square footage, accounting firms, everyone. And those are the tenants downtown. And so I think part of the idea behind what we're doing is in recognition of the fact that for a downtown like ours to thrive on into the future, it has to become something much more than an office park, a vertical
Yeah.
office park.
Right.
And it needs to be a compelling place for people to just want to be. And that's why the waterfront developments, lake and river, and then the pathways to connect pedestrians, cyclists, et cetera,
Yeah.
between the two is so critical to the health of downtown.
And Mr. Chair, do you remember when Public Square was finished? When we unveiled the
16.
It's 2016.
2016.
14 and 16, yeah.
So we had 4 years until COVID hit. Did we see appreciation of property values in the 4 years until the plague? Okay. Couple more questions then. One of them is just sort of a political question through the chair to the chiefs. This is a 30-year project. We're looking at a $1.25 billion public investment with hopes to yield $5.5 billion in private. But this is going to outlast most of our political tenures. This is going to become a project inherited by your predecessor, or your, not predecessors, successors, yeah, that's the one. Should this be successful, we are indebting the future to our decision making. And I understand that's how government works and that's how capitalism works. You make decisions and then you pay the bills later. How long, through the chair to the chief, whoever wants to take this, do you think it will take for us to determine whether or not this strategy is succeeding in a way that will encourage future mayors, future councils to continue down this path? Because the expenditure of the TIF revenue is not set in stone in 20 years.
Through the chair, that's a great question. And just talking about this with the mayor the other day, and Jeff and I were talking about it yesterday. I think if you look at cities across the country that have seen kind of really acute renaissance over the last 5 to 10 years, the seeds of that renaissance were planted a decade or two before. Because this does take time, and we had a conversation with one of, I believe, former city manager from Cincinnati, who said, "You're going to see this you're going to see the real fruits of this in about 10 years."
Yeah.
It takes time because these projects take time. Think about the Euclid Corridor. I mean, that project started in 03,
Well, Campbell was mayor.
02, 03,
01.
and the Cleveland Foundation just moved its headquarters there a year ago.
Right.
This stuff takes time to
Yeah.
take root. It takes time for the momentum to build, but it is important that it start at some point.
You plant trees so that your children can sit in the shade, right?
Yep.
Well, two more questions, Mr. Chair, and then I'll stop. Back into the nitty-gritty about taxes, because most of the questions that I got from my residents were people not understanding how tax collection works. So, inside millage, the 10 mills that are collected that adjust with value. So, say you have a $100,000 house, and we only collect taxes on 35% of property value. That's just something the county does. A mill becomes $35. A mill on a $100,000 property is $35. 10 mil is $350. But if your house doubles and goes up to $200,000, your 10 mils now is $700. And that's why you see your tax rate go up if your value goes up. But operating levies are designed to collect a certain amount of money, and the millage is retroactively calculated to figure out how much everybody needs to pay in order to raise that amount. And if your property value goes up, your millage goes down because you're still collecting the same amount. And so that's why we say that this does not affect operating levies, because all current operating levies are already collecting millage on the downtown parcels and will continue to collect millage on the downtown parcels based on those current operating levies. It's future operating levies that will no longer collect from downtown parcels. And so when people come up with future operating levies for the county, they're going to have to calculate that millage collected on 96.5% of property values, not 100%, because we will have carved out 3.5% downtown.
Through the chair, not the base value of that 3.5%, only the increase on the 3.5%. So in reality, it's actually a lot less that they'll have to
So a
produce.
$1 million building downtown today that doesn't currently pay a millage on a levy that it's not going to be passed for 5 years, in 5 years, when that levy is passed, there will still be a millage calculated for their existing 100 and below to pay their portion of that operating levy.
Through the chair, yes.
So this should theoretically raise taxes for them because they'll be paying well, no, because it's still an operating levy. It's still a total amount raised. Okay. So the loss of revenue comes from the inside millage. Well, no, the inside millage still gets paid. Even if downtown values appreciate, buildings downtown still pay their inside millage to the governing body. That doesn't change. The TIF doesn't exclude inside, correct?
Chief?
The inside millage is the inside millage regardless of property values, and I think they still get that.
Through the chair, I'd have to confirm. We spent so much time focusing on the voted levies because that is the reality of the overlapping entities that we've been engaging with. That I know we've talked about the inside millage.
I
It's
don't
just
remember the
escaping me right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Teicher, can you add that to our follow-up list, please?
It's just the way I saw this is that if future levies are passed that don't get to include downtown buildings, it could shift tax burden by a couple of bucks a year to the average city resident and a couple dozen bucks to the average suburban resident, because housing values typically are higher in the suburbs than they are in the city. So if we have lower housing values, the shifted burden could be a couple dollars on future levies for the average Cleveland property owner, or a couple dozen bucks per year for the suburban if you've got a $500,000 house out in Pepper Pike or something. And to me, that is not a grave enough concern to prevent us from trying to secure revenue for the future of Cleveland. That's not a high enough disbursement of taxing responsibility for us to say no. It seems to make sense that if we want to grow this city, we have to invest in the city. We have to find the funds from somewhere. And this works really, really well to do that. Last question, through the chair to anyone who wants to answer, can we build a public parking garage with bonded money from TIF revenue?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, and then we can, through the chair to the chief, we could then sell that to a private entity or transfer ownership.
Through the chair, theoretically, yes, but if we use debt to pay for that, the debt cannot remain outstanding so long as, in any circumstance in which we do not any longer own the facility. So
Okay.
if we were to sell it, we would have to take the sale proceeds and use it to pay off the debt. There would be no windfall.
Okay,
So no private parking lot.
I mean, theoretically, we could do all of that, but if we borrow TIF revenue bonds
yeah,
to build a parking garage,
Right.
and then down the road, someone decides they want to sell that parking garage to a private entity, and if those bonds
to pay the debt.
remain outstanding,
Right.
we would have to use the sale proceeds to pay off the bonds.
Okay.
There wouldn't be a cash windfall to the city for doing that.
okay.
So, if I could jump in here, Councilman, so, you know, the expenditures that are allowed under state law currently, does it allow also for municipalities to exclude certain uses as well? I mean, I would, like we want to exclude, through our local ordinance that we're passing here, that will explicitly outline, you know, certain uses like a private parking garage or lot, that we are able to do that.
Through the chair, I would think so, but would certainly want to confirm with the law department.
Yeah, just a question.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Mr. Chair, I scanned, it's Exhibit B, which is the state law that describes what we can spend this money on. I scanned it for the word private. The word private appears 3 times in Exhibit B. And for environmental health purposes, necessary to enable the construction of private improvements, we can implement environmental remediations needed for the construction of private improvements so we can clean land.
Right.
We can, for stormwater runoff, we can repay or reimburse for projects and facilities on private property when determined to be necessary for public health, safety, and welfare for stormwater. And for demolition, we can pay for demolition on private property. This is the state ORC that dictates what we can spend TIF revenue on. So there is no mention of private facilities that can be constructed. And I just wanted to clarify that because I know that that's something people are sort of talking about. Mr. Chair, I asked months ago for a reason to not support this. No one could find it. I think this is a good way for us to capture revenue, to invest in our city, to grow our urban area, our core, and to hopefully transition downtown into a great livable neighborhood. Not that it's not already, Councilman McCormick. I know it's a wonderful place to live, but to keep investing in the city and embrace a growth mentality. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I think Councilman Starr had a brief point, and we'll go to Councilman Joe Jones.
No, just for a point of clarification, I know the port has committed around $100 million in bonds for the TIF district. They did the same in the flats, but we haven't received any reimbursements yet. So what's the need for this, to the chair?
Chiefs, has the port committed
Through the chair, no.
funds for this?
There's been no commitment from the port on this.
All right, Councilman. Okay.
That's what he said earlier. Yeah, because I thought I heard that earlier when we was talking about the port. But
Unless that was.
Through the chair, it's the port is a potential partner in a bond issuance, but there's no agreement. There's been no real concrete discussion of what that could look like, even if they're willing to do it, but it's possible.
okay,
And,
thank you.
and through the chair, the port presumably has been the issuer of bonds for other projects in the past within the district, such as Flats East Bank or others.
But are we receiving reimbursement similar to the flats?
Through the chair. So the way that those bond issues work is the port will issue the debt backed by the service payments for the relevant TIF. The cash production of that bond sale will immediately be made available to the project, and then the project developer uses that cash to pay down the cost of the project. So there's no reimbursement that comes. It's just the proceeds of the bond sale are used to pay the cost of the project. And then the TIF payments over the 30 years or whatever the duration of the TIF, the payments are used to then pay the principal and interest on the debt for as long as it's outstanding.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. In Section 3B of the ordinance, it talks about where the city can no longer require or will no longer require service payments in lieu of taxes. Can you give us a scenario in which that would apply? It's in Section 3B. And that the question from Councilman Harsh and Councilman Starr made me think about that. That's the question I had to staff as well, but I wanted to make sure I ask that from you all as well. It talks about, city can no longer require payments in lieu of taxes in 3B. I didn't quite understand. I didn't quite follow what that meant.
To the chair, my read of that was if there was a change in state law that prohibited us from having this kind of TIF in place, or some other, if there was a court decision ordering us to cease the TIF. But I don't know what the reason would be for us to cut it off, other than the stated expiration date.
I don't know if the law department, does you want to add into that, or there's no. Can you use your microphone?
I read it to go to the act, the TIF Act itself. If there were a change in the law that would impact that term, we would have to follow that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my thinking was going down that road, but I wanted to ask you all that as well, because it's in the piece, and so. Okay. All right, Councilman Joe Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions that I have on this here. I just received the information as of today in terms of this presentation that was made. So it's quite different from the presentation I had received earlier. And so I want to start out with this preference. I've been here for quite some time, and I've seen the empowerment zone. I've seen this city make sizable investments at the airport on projects that never came to fruition. We never got the extended airport we were promised. I've seen us invest in bringing back the Cleveland Browns and Indians and Cavaliers and building a lot of infrastructure in downtown. And I've seen the last 20 years in selecting and picking winning neighborhoods, what communities we're going to invest in and what communities we're not going to invest in. And it wasn't said that way, but how the funds roll, you have to follow the dollars. And so I'm saying this because this is important to say. With the empowerment zone and other programs that were in certain areas and neighborhoods, they still, unfortunately, have not benefited in the way initially those programs were put in place to benefit. And the whole point and the purpose of why we're here today right now is to talk about spurring economic development. And in doing so, one of the discussions I had earlier, and we had talked about it to some great degree, is regulatory reform here in the city of Cleveland as relates to economic development, as relates to businesses making and removing processes and bureaucratic barriers in the city of Cleveland to make it easier for businesses to operate here in the city. And it would also mean that we should simplify the permitting process. We should look at zoning reforms and reducing unnecessary regulatory and regulations that may hinder economic growth in our businesses. Right now, when I need to have a business person, Mr. Chairman, come here and try to say, for an example, build a shopping plaza, they go through so much. And if they want to build a house, it could be anywhere from 1 year to 2 years before they can actually establish or just begin to start tearing the ground open to bring that development to play. And I submit to you, Mr. Chairman, that's way too long. And so for me to sit here and be supportive of this, I would like to also see some kind of reform being done on the other side. Neighborhoods right now is economic development, and communities that I live in the Lee Harvard area has been moving at such a slow pace that we haven't been able to keep up. We have buildings, Mr. Chairman, that are falling down. And when we look at the city of Cleveland's downtown area, we have been blessed, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Epstein, with people who could have totally redeveloped the entire city, downtown city of Cleveland, right in our own backyard. They didn't do it. They took their money over to Pittsburgh. They took their money to Washington, D.C. They went to other areas and building and investing and moving hundreds of millions and billions of dollars investment, and right here in their own backyard, those corporate communities didn't give 1 cent and doing anything that was significant to rebuild the city of Cleveland. And I heard some comments. Now, I don't know Dan Gilbert, but I know what he has done. And I've seen him rebuild downtown Detroit at a time when no one else was investing. And he is now one of, if it's my, and you can correct me, Mr. Chairman, so let me ask you the question. Who's the biggest owner of property in the city of Cleveland downtown area?
Through the chair, I don't know officially. Certainly, Bedrock is a major landholder, K&D, in terms of the number of apartment buildings they own. Those, outside
Who
of
is
the, outside
KD?
of the city and county.
Who is KD?
K&D.
Okay. And so he's one of the biggest owners of property. Is that what you're saying? Is he one of them that you're aware of?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. So when we start talking about, and I don't know him, but what I can respect is that I've seen his hands at work in Detroit. And he's really turned that entire downtown area completely around. And I don't know if he had TIFs. And when you started this presentation out, Mr. Chairman, you talked about, and I didn't get the other name, you said you worked with a Steve Huffman and a Mr. who, Allen?
Andre Allen.
Andre Allen. And who is Andre Allen?
He's a financial advisor who has worked on behalf of the city for a couple of decades.
And when putting this TIF together, were these gentlemen the architect for putting this whole piece together here for us?
Through the chair, no.
No? Who was the architect? Who was responsible for putting it together as it is here now?
Through the chair, a lot of people. Jeff, myself, we did a lot of work with PFM, Public Financial Management, which is a large firm that focuses on municipal finance and advises cities all over the country on matters like this. And then also Allegro Realty, which is a realty firm in town that also provides advisory services and helped us understand the real estate side of the TIF district.
And did they look at the Chicago's TIF program for their downtown area, which is well known throughout the country with its various different programs in Kansas City, and I think Denver, those are the top three that have been very successful. And San Francisco has just now, they've been in process with their TIF and building affordable housing.
Through the chair, we've looked at TIFs from all over the country. That said, we really focused our attention on other similar efforts within the state of Ohio because the legal authority around TIF, the structures that are allowed under state laws vary greatly from state to state, and it may not be, what is possible in Illinois might not be possible here, so we really focused our efforts on what's happened within the state and how we can build off of that.
And so that's in the issue of state law, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How did you come about developing the boundaries? How did that come about?
Through the chair to the councilman, I think we really looked at a combination of what would be impacted by the public improvements and subsequent private investments that we anticipated via the TIF district, and what was kind of within the range of impact of those areas.
And with this piece that you've got here before us right now, in terms of how the geography is set, your estimated value of this entire corridor, I think you put it on one of your screens. What's the total value of these properties within this boundary?
Councilman, if I could jump in there before you answer that question, just to add on to Councilman Jones, is there any limitations from the state on how large a TIF district can be? I think that would be helpful to him as well.
Through the chair, not when using the .40 section of the revised code. There are other TIF districts you can create that have geographic limitations, but not with this one.
Got it. Councilman.
So this doesn't have any limitations. And so are you saying that the value of these properties is $4 billion that you have here on page 13? I think that's 13 or 14.
Through the chair, that's the projected value at a 3.5% growth, annual growth in 2030. I'm going to pull up here quickly the current value today for you. But carry on while I'm doing that, please.
One of the things is if you could give an example, I know that you have put down here a number of projects you're going to use out of these funds. Is that correct? Concerning the lakefront and the riverfront.
Through the chair, yeah. So on the screen, there's the riverfront slide, which includes a high-level overview of what we expect, and then next up is lakefront, which does the same, and then finally is the core, which is the work to really connect the lakefront and the riverfront in a more meaningful and useful way.
So are these projects all written in stone, or are these just the beginning? I mean, because we don't have you have an estimated investment here, but or do you already have it all mapped out?
Through the chair, I mean, various aspects of this are further along in their planning and development. So I think the riverfront work, for example, which is unique in this effort in that it's the public infrastructure being done is a component of a larger development that is being led by Bedrock. And that's being done in phases. We are working very closely with Bedrock to specifically identify the schedule and the cost of each phase of the work when it comes to the public infrastructure. So that work is a little more defined today than the others. When you look at the lakefront, we had the 60% drawing of the master plan produced last year. That continues to be refined with feedback from stakeholders, and is getting closer and closer to being ready for more refined construction drawing work and cost estimating, and that includes the land bridge, which would connect Mall C to the lakefront, and any changes to Route 2. So that we're in process there, but it's a little less defined, less specific than the riverfront work. And then on the cores, that's probably the least well-defined aspect when it comes to the details. We have a pretty clear idea of what we're trying to accomplish with the core improvements. The how and when is what is yet to be determined. And so the planning department and others are working to really sketch out what those improvements could look like, and then with that, begin to build schedules and develop cost estimates.
So right now, we have a general idea from the riverfront, lakefront, all the way over to the core, these projects. But even with this TIF right here, we don't, what we will be pulling out the bank wouldn't cover these costs, or at the current moment, or would this be the proposition over time? Because you're looking at $400 million in just the riverfront alone.
Through the chair, that's correct. It's a really important point that at the 3.5% projected growth in assessed value, we saw in one of the earlier slides what we're anticipating we can borrow in total, and it's that $558 million figure that's on the screen right now, which means to complete the work, we're going to have to use more than just the bond proceeds. So the bond proceeds, because of the covenants we'll have to agree to be able to sell bonds, will not produce enough money on their own to complete the projects. And that's where we'll need to use the other revenue in excess of what we need to pay debt service to actually have the funds to complete the work.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I know that we had talked a little bit about this, and it sounds fuzzy, and I know you guys know the answer. If you don't know it, if you could bring it back later on this, and I don't know how we're going to do this, is talking about the bonds, because when we move here to page 14, you'll be able to pull out each year. Is that what you'll be able to pull out each year from 2030, or is this just an example slide here for 5-year increments of what you're able to pull out cash-wise? Or could you potentially pull out more than this, because it seems like this is a conservative estimate?
So through the chair, this is simply a projection. It's one of, frankly, an infinite number of scenarios that could play out. And it's really just intended to give council a sense of the scale of what we're envisioning and how the TIF district will function in terms of a cash flow perspective. So it's almost that the numbers, the specific numbers aren't what's most important here. It's that, the notion that we see in 2050 a significant increase in the annual production of the TIF, and that's going to happen irrespective of what the growth rate is, right? If it's 5%, 3%, 70%, whatever it is, it's really going to kick into high gear in approximately 2050 based on the work that we've done. And so the amount of money that's actually made available through this will depend on a whole host of factors, the success of our work, how quickly do these infrastructure investments and does the momentum of this work generate that private investment activity that we are anticipating will come. And the sooner that happens, the sooner we can get this work done, the more quickly we're going to see the real fruits of this effort.
The previous administration, Mr. Chairman, to the director, was able to receive funds for what they call the bridge over to the Brown Stadium. Will this be a part of that?
Through the chair, those are planning dollars from the Ohio Department of Transportation that we are currently spending down in the plans. These funds are envisioned of taking that plan into reality.
I see. So you will be using this as a part of helping to develop that out?
Through the chair, yes, that's
I
correct.
see. And so you did note here that you wouldn't be investing in baseball stadiums. Can you tell me how that came about?
I think that through the chair, we just wanted to be explicit about our intent with these funds to use them for public infrastructure.
I see. And so, Mr. Chairman, I started the proposition out about neighborhoods. How much money are we looking to, from this TIF, of these funds? Is it 35% of the funds of this TIF will be spent in city neighborhoods?
Through the chair, I think this is a good slide to be on when you ask that question, because it depends greatly on what happens in these years. I think a fundamental aspect of this effort requires that we spend enough money in the district to generate that annual property tax value increase. If we don't spend enough money within the district to get that annual appreciation, then we might not even have enough money to finish the work that is needed within the district for the shore to core to shore effort. I think when we'll be able to really start spending money in the neighborhoods is when we have the certainty that we have the funds either in hand or we're reasonably confident that they will come to finish the work within the TIF district itself. That's when we can really start having exciting conversations about how this gets spent in the neighborhood, in the other neighborhoods across the city, to improve infrastructure, make these neighborhoods across the city better places to be.
What kind of tools can we put in place for the communities and neighborhoods like this? My neighborhood needs plenty of development, and I've said here at this table when I was a young council person coming in, we received $26 million in private-public partnership, $4 million from the city to help to put in a new, a little bit more than $4 million, and we got money from then Congressman Louis Stokes to put together a state-of-the-art Lee Harvard Shopping Plaza. And right now, we haven't really received any kind of significant development in our commercial corridors. I know that we're currently working on a program for Southeast, but I'd like to see programs that can sustain our neighborhoods like this. And so the question that I'm asking you is, what can we put together? Because I know that we have one-time ARPA funds, and once they're used, and that's gone. This here is going to be an ongoing process. Can we put a TIF in our neighborhood? Can Lee Harvard do a TIF program?
Through the chair to the councilman, I think that's something we can discuss at a future date. I think we're here to talk about the TIF district downtown right now, but I will say, in particular in your neighborhood, we are planning to issue an RFP at the end of the month for multiple development sites. We've allocated $5 million towards commercial corridors, which we have over 50 applicants from businesses in the area. We're working collaboratively with the banks and other partners to try to drive more investment into the neighborhoods, and I think that's consistent with the administration's approach to the site fund that Chief Abunama has been directly involved with in terms of finding ways to direct and drive greater investment across our neighborhoods.
And what I will say, Mr. Chairman, because one of the things that's really important is, and I see money in other neighborhoods too, so, and I see it at a larger sum and resources. Now, let me say this. I appreciate what you do for the citizens of the city of Cleveland. I'm not against this. What I'm trying to do is understand how we can develop a tool, because I've been here long enough to see from one administration to the next administration. And I have stated in the past where I stand at in terms of people who help Southeast out. I'm committed and dedicated to people who help my neighborhood and my community, and I'm very supportive of this administration. But if something would happen and this administration is not here, I would like to have guarantees like this TIF here. You heard some of those other council members talk about, well, this is going to be here long after we're gone. Want to see a sustained proposition in it all. That's the reason why I opened up and talked about the $100 million that was put in place in Fannie Lewis's ward, and economic development, how that fund was spent. I sat here at this table and saw it. And this neighborhood still looks bad. So when we talk about putting this piece in place, we're also talking about risk. And that's the reason why I was asking about a TIF in my neighborhood. But let's get to where the bonds are at, because I want to talk about that a little bit, Mr. Chairman, if I can. How does the city bond process work in this situation for this TIF?
Through the chair, so we will, given the nature of the TIF and the way the revenue comes in, it really comes in kind of relatively slowly for the first 7 to 10 years, and then starts to accelerate in terms of the production. We will work with our advisors to come up with a borrowing schedule that maximizes our ability to leverage the dollars that we have and that we'll have available to get as much upfront money as possible to get the work going. I think it's critical to do everything we can to get this work moving as quickly as possible so that we start seeing the benefits as soon as possible. In terms of the process, we, as with any, if we were to do the deal ourselves and not go through a third party such as the port or some other issuing entity, we procure underwriting services through an RFP process. We work with our bond counsel, and then we work with the underwriter collaboratively to structure the deal in a way that makes sense, that they're confident that they can sell the bonds at competitive rates to then give us the cash we need to get the work done.
So then we're responsible for going to the bond market as a city to go get those resources, correct?
Through the chair, if the city issues if we decide to directly borrow the money, yes, the city would be the entity to go to the bond market. I do want to note that for a good chunk of this work, as Jeff noted earlier, we're working on a letter of intent with the Federal Department of Transportation to participate in their TIFIA program. There is a scenario in which we would be able to use the federal government as our lender as opposed to the bond markets, which comes with a whole host of advantages, longer term to pay the debt back, better interest rates, et cetera. So we'll be working kind of the parallel paths, and we'll be prepared to take whichever path is the best for us to ensure success with the project.
And so the city would then be responsible or bear the risk of the bond if we submit it, or would you have a subsidiary operation do it? I mean, if the city does it, we would bear that risk. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman, to our CFO?
So it really comes down to the details. So a good example is with our enterprise funds. So the Division of Water has its own revenues, its own expenses, borrows money to provide funding for capital projects throughout the division. The security for those bonds that are sold is only the revenues of the Division of Water. It's the ratepayers of the division, the customers of the division pay their bill every month, and the division uses that to secure the bonds that are sold by the city. The general fund is not at risk for those bonds.
Okay.
And this would be the same.
It would be like the city, or we would create that subsidiary operation, is what it sounds like to me. And then the next thing is, would the developers bear any risk in this?
Through the chair, when we're talking about basic public infrastructure that is being done
It wouldn't
by
be the
city,
developers.
it wouldn't be part of, for an infrastructure project that is not part of a broader developer project. No, I think that question gets a little more interesting and a little trickier when we're talking about infrastructure projects that are technically public infrastructure, but are being done as part of a broader private development project.
Right.
Makes that conversation a little trickier to have, and that's part of the work we've been doing thus far, is figuring out where those lines are and where we would want to have a developer provide some kind of credit support for work that is benefiting the developer, and when not.
Now, I'm supportive of the program, and I have some more. Do I still have some time?
You won't be in time now, so we can wrap it up and we'll keep going down the list and come back.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I support this project, and I support it because we're not sitting on our hands. We're trying to do something. So I'm appreciative, but I am concerned about how it works, and I do have questions, and I will send some of those questions to you so that you could help me understand. One of them would be when we created the district and we created this zone, would be how it has an impact on the broader community in terms of levies, existing levies and taxes, and if we had done any kind of projections on that, and what does that mean, and how do we make up the difference? And so some of those things would be some of my questioning. We do have a poorer community, a poorer neighborhood now than what we've had in years past, and I am concerned about my senior citizens in my neighborhood, and I'm concerned about services in our community that comes from the various different entities that will no longer receive these their share of the taxes from the downtown district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Councilwoman Spencer, you had a comment from earlier that I think we wanted to go back to and flush out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think I'm going to send as a follow-up to you, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Tytran in advance of Finance Committee on Monday, just really clarifying any potential impacts on the city's bond rating, and then ultimately, if revenues fell short, who would be responsible for repaying the bonds? So I'd like to make sure we discuss that if we can today, but also in Finance on Monday.
Chief?
So through the chair, I'll take the second one first. The way this any bond sale would be structured that is supported by the TIF revenues would be that the only source of repayment for the bonds is explicitly limited to the TIF revenues. And investors know that when they buy the bonds. And so if I'll leave that there. And then there's one significant way that we counteract that risk, the risk that there wouldn't be enough funds to pay any bonds that are issued, and that's by being conservative in what we borrow against our projections. And we can do that in a couple of ways. One is we are conservative in the annual appreciation growth, which we are doing in this presentation. We're using 3.5% as the annual growth assumption. Two is we can always increase the debt service coverage covenant. So by debt service coverage, I mean typically when cities or other issuers sell TIF debt, which is project debt, which is the riskiest form of debt that cities can sell, they'll include in the documents a covenant to the bondholders that they'll maintain at least 130% of what's needed to pay the debt back in a trust account. So for every dollar that's owed, we would maintain $1.30. Another way to ensure, so that gives us essentially a 30% cushion against our projections. So our projections could come in lower than we anticipate, and we would have that 30% cushion in there because we are obligated to maintain that coverage ratio. Another way that we can protect the city against that kind of risk is upping that coverage ratio to 140%, 150%. And that where that gets settled is based on our negotiations with investors, with the underwriter of our debt, with our financial advisors, to ensure that everyone is confident that what is being borrowed is going to be repaid from the stated source. So I think there's always risk. If there wasn't any risk, there would be no benefit to what we're doing. And so I think part of our exercise here is getting comfortable with some amount of risk as part of what we're doing. Now, when we look at our credit rating, there's nothing specifically that would impact our credit rating by doing these kinds of transactions. When we look at our general obligation rating, that rating is based on the strength of the local economy. It's based on the strength of our income tax receipts, and it's based on the strength of how much cash we have on hand to meet our obligations. Those are the three primary factors that go into our credit rating. Issuing TIF revenue bonds that are not part of our general obligation pledge would never impede our general obligation pledge. Does not have any on its face impact on our credit rating. There's always the risk there, and there's sort of the reputational risk where if a bond issue fails, even though we're not obligated to provide any resources beyond the TIF revenues, there's certainly reputational risk where if a bond associated with the city of Cleveland fails for some reason, that'll provide some level of taint to the city for a period of time. Now, whether that level rises to a downgrade in our bond rating is wholly unknown because it's unknown what the circumstances of that would be. But I think what I would ask you and others to take away is that we are fully cognizant of these issues as we're working this project. And from every angle, we're going to do everything we possibly can to ensure that the city is as insulated as possible while admittedly taking a risk to get that long-term future benefit.
Anything further, Councilwoman? All right. Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Just a few questions from me. I know the state ordinance that allows for this type of action to be created. The uses of the proceeds. I'm assuming that changes based on the state changes in the state ordinances, correct?
So to the chairman, that
State law, rather.
Yeah, in the revised code, the section of the revised code, that hasn't changed a lot over the years.
Okay.
It's pretty consistent. It's pretty high level. When you look at it, it's
Okay.
not super specific. So there's broad categories. I think the most recent change was the parking garages several years ago, but even that I think was at least a decade ago.
And if there are ever any changes within the state code, do we have to dissolve this particular district, or can we amend the ordinance that allow for the additional uses or uses that may not be allowable anymore? How would that? What is that process? Have we looked at that?
Yeah, to the chairman and defer to the law department. My assumption would be we would just conform our administration of the TIF district to be consistent with the revised code. So we wouldn't have to, I wouldn't imagine we'd have to dissolve it unless for some reason the legislature took away our authority to just administer a TIF district, period. We would just, if there was some purpose that we had authorized in this ordinance that for some reason becomes unlawful under the revised code, I think we would just have to amend to omit that purpose out of our ordinance.
To the chair, just to add on to that, I think it would be highly unlikely, I would think, that the state would change law to the point that we would have to dissolve a district where we had bond commitments against the collections from that district. I think it would open up huge issues across the state. I think it would be more likely if they were to amend anything, it would be prospective rather than impacting we do, but
I mean, you know who we're dealing with. So, I mean, I'll just say that, right? Okay, and I would, if any amendment should arise through the state law that would allow for more things for us to do with the TIF proceeds, I would expect that I would come back to this body to amend the ordinance. I mean, I hear what you're saying about, you know, because I'm looking at the Exhibit B when it talks about, but not limited to, these functions. And so that prompted me to ask that question, you know, but not limited to, that you have written in this ordinance. Do you envision any other uses beyond what has been laid out in Exhibit B? You know, when you see that language, you sometimes expect other, you know, uses to come forward at some point that may not be, you know, being considered now, but there's some thought, you know, down the road about additional uses of these proceeds. And so I'm a bit concerned about the even included but not limited to language. If we go on your response that you just gave, that, you know, if more allowable uses should come into play through any changes within the state law, that the administration can act on those without coming back to this body, you know, to seek approval to add additional uses in your abilities that we've given you through this action.
To the chair, the way we anticipate this working is that we would come back to you later this year and say we're going to issue X million dollars of bonds, and we want to spend Y million of them on these particular public infrastructure projects to support the river, Z million for this particular public infrastructure projects. And so council would get the oversight and approval on both the issuance of debt and the specific projects for which we would be expending that would be aligned with categories in this ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, to the chairman, I would maybe think about it one way is that this ordinance that is in front of us right now is kind of setting the parameters of what's possible, but any specific thing that we'd want to do within those parameters would still have to be authorized by council.
Right, no, I get that. I'm just, Exhibit B has things that we've laid out as public improvements, right? But also there's language that says included but not limited to. So my question, you know, when I see that, you know, are there other thoughts that you have in your mind that you don't have listed here today, but that you will possibly or could possibly consider down the road that, you know, we won't know about until maybe something is happening and then someone pulls our coattails, right?
Yeah, through the chair, no. And I would just say that language is there to, I think, ensure that if there are changes to the revised code of the relevant section, that those changes would essentially be incorporated in this ordinance. But I think to the prior point that even if something is authorized in this ordinance, we can't do it until a separate ordinance is passed by council authorizing that specific set of activities. And so I think it eliminates one step from the process by having this ordinance, kind of by its terms, incorporate the language of the revised code as the menu of options, so that it can be one of the variety of things that we request authority for from council at a later date.
Okay, understood. Yes, Councilman Jones.
Mr. Chairman, I do have another question I didn't add in, but would like to see if the administration has a answer to it. These TIFs will also be helping to finance apartments and units in downtown, I mean, for development.
Through the chair,
Like
can you,
prop-
can you,
like
can you ask the
living-
question again? I'm not sure I understand
Like
it.
if a developer wants to come and put 250 unit housing complex here, could the TIF be used for something like that?
Through the chair, it could not.
It could not. So if anyone wants to put development and housing, none of that could be used in this program where we have right now.
Through the chair, if someone wanted to bring 250 units of housing within the TIF district, they would be eligible for residential tax abatement under the previous aspect of the code. And if they needed additional incentive, and the city and city council agreed that it needed additional incentive beyond that, we could enact a project TIF to support that project and lift it out of the TIF district.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for your robust discussion today. You know, again, I think the many conversations that we've been having about this and interactions along the way has really helped us get to this point where we are today. Again, the previous administration has really set the foundation for us to be able to do this, and so we are very grateful and thankful for the Jackson administration's work, you know, that has gotten our downtown and our city to the point it is today. And so now we're going to look into the future from where we are today. Just a couple of last points. I know that, you know, we always say, and then, you know, we hear that, oh, things have to come back to this body. So to further cement that, we're going to just add that to this ordinance that explicitly states that any and all uses of the TIF proceeds, the TIF district proceeds, will come back to council for further authorization, that no proceeds shall be used without further authorization from this council. And then also in the second whereas clause, we're going to add in neighborhood investments, as we've been discussing. You know, we want to add a percentage because, again, that's something that needs to be further flushed out. But I think it is important that we add neighborhood investments into the second whereas clause, as well as we look at strengthening investments in the waterfronts in downtown, parks and recreation throughout the Cleveland neighborhood. So as the chair, and I have consulted with our legal counsel that I am able to make these amendments myself, that we will add what I just discussed into the piece as amendments. So I'll go back and read and be clear about what I'm saying with the law department. So as a chair, I move to amend ordinance number 38-2024 in the second whereas clause to add neighborhood investments. You can add at the end. We can clean up where we want to add that in the whereas clause. And that's speaking to our continuous conversation about ensuring that other neighborhoods across the city of Cleveland also receive investments from the funds generated by the TIF proceeds. And then secondly, we want to make sure that we add language in that any and all uses of the TIF district proceeds shall come back to this body for further authorization. And that also includes any issuance of debts as well.
Second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, ayes have it. And we have a second amendment. There's no legal objection to this language. Legislation is if it's amended as follows: one, strike Exhibit A in its entirety, and insert the following new Exhibit A. Exhibit A, map of parcels within the district. Everyone has this on their tablet as well. This takes out the map that was inside of our original ordinance and replaces it with the amended map of parcels that we see in blue. All right? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, ayes have it. So we've made three, we've made three amendments today. And before we close out, I think that Mr. Deemer from Downtown Cleveland Lions want to make brief remarks as we move on, before we close out. Mr. Deemer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief because I understand.
Oh, there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief because I know you're trying to get on to your next thing. But I did want to offer Downtown Cleveland Inc.'s full support for the legislation that's being considered today. I've been in the audience for most of the dialogue today, and really appreciate the seriousness with which all of you are considering this. Grateful for the committee's support. I think the administration has done a terrific job in putting this together and starting to look at tools that other communities across the state have used for a long time to invest in their cities. And I'm glad to see City Council and the administration moving forward with the types of tools, again, that have been used with great success in other parts of the city, the state. I just wanted to emphasize that from downtown's perspective, there's a great opportunity here, as has been alluded to really complete the transformation of the Central Business District into a full-fledged neighborhood. Rightfully so, much of the discussion is around the shores, the investment on the river and the lakefront, and the really catalytic things that can happen there. But I think we've really got an opportunity here to transform the core, the sidewalks, the parks, the public spaces that truly belong to all Clevelanders, to make them a more inviting and welcoming place. So I'm grateful for the support, looking forward to working with the administration and all of you to implement and make this very successful. And I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words today.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Deemer. Thank you again to everyone. Again, great work. We're all in this together. We've all, rolled our sleeves up and done the great work, and so we appreciate the questions and comments today. This body intends to be a part of this process every step of the way. There's no big eyes or little eyes. We're all in this together, all right? And so we look forward to working with everyone to really make this work, right? We want to see hear what we saw happen in Detroit downtown, right? We've seen a lot of that progress already, but we can see even more. With collaborations like this. And so we just thank everyone for their commitment. All right, seeing no further questions, ordinance number 38-2024 as amended stands approved. All right, thank you all.